Hi there, and welcome to this presentation of my experience building the 1/48 scale Zoukei Mura F4C Wild Weasel. There are several very good 1/48 Phantom kits on the market at the moment, aren't there? So let's see how good this one is. So here's the pile of bits involved in building this particular mustelid. There's a little matter of 426 parts here. The standard of moulding is beautiful. There's no sign of flash anywhere. There are no awkwardly positioned ejector marks. All in all, a very promising start. Need to say though, quite a few of these parts aren't actually used because they feature in other kits with other sub-variants of the Phantom. You can see here that the standard of detail is extremely good. The surface detail, a mixture of raised and engraved, very nicely done indeed, with quite a lot of raised detail on the internal parts as well. All in all, it's a pretty impressive start. The box also includes excellent painting instructions and very comprehensive information about where the decals should be placed. The decals themselves provide markings for 3 different aircraft, 2 from the Vietnam era and 1 rather later one that was based in Germany. The quality of the decals looks good. More importantly, in action, when they were used later, they performed well too. The instruction book provided with the kit is very comprehensive and detailed, and it needs to be because this is really quite a complex kit, but with this booklet you can't really go wrong. I was going to make this model straight from the box, but in fact there are no seat belts provided at all, which is surprising for such a quality product. So in the end we had to purchase this set of Edouard extras here, which performed quite well, as you'll see in a bit. So to the build. Well, construction was supposed to begin with the cockpit interior, but in fact the underwing load was done instead. This looked to be a lengthy job, so it was handy to get it out of the way early on. The nature of the load was obviously related to the type of mission these aircraft carried out. So for weapons buffs amongst you, as well as the ubiquitous drop tanks, there was an ECM pod, 2 AIM-7 sidewinders to engage aerial opposition, and 2 AGM-45s for ground targets such as missile sites and radar installations. All items were very well represented in the kit. Everything assembles well, but care is required to ensure the individual fins for each missile are correctly squared up. A lot of detailing was required on both the missiles and the launch pylons. It was important to keep constantly referring to those instructions to ensure the correct placement, as mistakes could easily be made. The decals were good, very glossy, but they adhered well to the gloss white finish of the missiles. The ECM pod required some black striping to be painted on, but this posed no problem other than needing a delicate bit of masking. The completed items looked impressive, and now attention could be turned to assembling the main airframe. This was another job that I did rather out of sequence. There's a large part, I think it's O2, representing the forward fuselage underside. This requires a section cutting away and replacing with a new part provided in the kit. I think that's P2. The instructions provided very clear guidance about how to do this, but care was needed to get it right. Any slight misalignment will result in fit issues with the main fuselage later on. Worked fine in this case, but in fact it would have been easier if the job had been done when the instructions indicated, as the upper fuselage sections will be assembled and check fitting will be easier. Lesson learnt, perhaps. Now it's time to get back to the proper sequence, which involved building the cockpit tub, which also included the nose wheel bay. Over 30 parts are involved here, and the overall level of detail was good again. There's an Express upgrade set available from ZM that includes replacement instrument panels, if you can get it. In fact, the items provided in the kit looked effective enough once the appropriate decals had been applied. An aftermarket set that can be highly recommended, though, is the ejector seat enhancement set produced by Edouard that I mentioned earlier. This was actually produced for the Tamiya kit, but seemed to work perfectly well on this one. The items are pre-coloured and require some careful cutting, bending and gluing, but they dramatically improve the appearance of these very prominent units. The completed cockpit unit fitted well when the two main fuselage halves were joined, but finishing the fuselage requires the addition of a lot of small parts, some of which need modifying and all need carefully checking with the instructions, as the fit varied between individual aircraft represented by the kit. The pod under the nose cone is an example. There are 3 different options, one for each variant, and it's easy to get them mixed up. Now attention moved to the engines. Assembly of the two GE J79s proved very straightforward. The external casings of the engines were quite well detailed, although most all of this becomes invisible once the completed units are installed in the fuselage. The intake vane, its stays, careful to get them the right way around, and the afterburner ring are all nicely represented and all fit together well. Parts are provided for a stand that can be assembled to display one of the engines, but it's unlikely many of you will do this, if only because the external level of detail doesn't really merit it. The only slightly tricky part of the engine assembly stage was the attaching of the engine themselves to the air ducts. These need to be aligned carefully or they won't fit in the fuselage very well later on, and it'll be problematic attaching the exhaust nozzles. Again, the instructions are very clear about this, and the completed engines and duct assemblies can be test fitted onto the lower fuselage section, part 015, just to make sure. The next few stages involve the completion of the fuselage and the attachment of the wings. Not much to report here, although there was a bit of an issue when fitting the port and starboard air intakes. These are complex shapes and require some pre-painting and pre-assembly before being fitted to the fuselage. Each one snaps firmly into place, but there was a small gap along the top and rear edges that required minor filling. The wing assembly is completed by the addition of the flaps and control surfaces. These are all provided as separate items with the option of alternative closed or deployed positions. Whilst they all fitted to the wing very well, there was a surprising gap at the leading edge of the fuselage where the leading edge slat didn't extend far enough to meet the fuselage side. This proved quite tricky to fill. It would be better in retrospect to have added and shaped a bit of scrap plastic to the inner edge of the slat where it met the fuselage to eliminate the gap in the first place. The only other thing to watch is to ensure the correct and matching dihedral angle on the two outer wingtip panels. These also required a touch of filler after they'd been fitted. It was now time to complete the main paint job. A primer coat of Mr. Finishing Surfacer was applied over the whole model. This keys nicely into the base plastic and provides an excellent base for the top coats coming next. For the main colours, I used SMS Premium paints. The actual shades are shown on the screen. These are excellent acrylic lacquers that can be sprayed straight from the bottle, although I do tend to add 10% SMS thinner just to help the flow. They work best, I find, when sprayed at a slightly lower pressure than normal, about 12 to 15 psi, and seldom clog the airbrush. They give a smooth, even finish that is also more resilient than straight acrylics. A look at the canopy parts next. These were well produced, reasonably thin and crystal clear. There's a vinyl masking set included, but it's very basic, just catering for the outside frame lines. DIY was required for the rest, but it's not a difficult job as the framing is pretty minimal. The frame colour on the inside is black, incidentally, with the flat windscreen panel tinted blue. When it comes to fit the canopy parts to the model, they fitted very well, and placing the units in the open position proved easier than I anticipated. When it comes to applying the decals, be prepared for a long job. It's important to get a gloss finish before applying any markings, as we know. Some remainings Johnson's Clear was used in this case, but any acrylic varnish would have done. The decal application takes a long time simply because there are so many tiny items to apply. There are about 70 for the fuselage underside alone, and many of them are very small. They went on well, the decals, but they didn't like to be repositioned. If this was done, they tended to lose their adhesion very quickly, and silvering could result even on a gloss surface. Decals are provided for the red and white stripes at the tip of the fin and also for the red tips of the tail plates. Frankly, it was easier to mask and paint these rather than trying to get the decals to conform. For finishing, I gave a light wash of Flory Models Grey weathering streaked along the undersurfaces with wipes of brown and grime on the upper surface. Most was washed off with just enough remaining to make a subtle difference. The representation of the undercarriage is a real positive of this kit. The individual components are all well moulded with excellent detail. The nose and main wheel legs assemble easily and fit into their bays very securely, although the lugs on the main wheel legs were a bit oversized and took some trimming to fit correctly. The various doors are nicely detailed and commendably thin and fitted into place easily and securely. Air brakes are also included and can be displayed in the open position if required. Fitting the pre-assembled payload proved to be no problem. The centre and wing mounted drop tanks were fitted first. These weren't weathered like the rest of the fuselage underside because of course they would be newly fitted for each mission. The 4 missiles all located easily, but the ECM pod was a bit tricky because the points of attachment to the pylon were so small. So there we have it. This was a very enjoyable build, despite, or maybe because, it literally took me twice as long as I originally expected. The ZM kit is essentially a very good product. It's clearly well researched and supported by excellent instructions and colour guides. It has a high parts count, but is generally easy to assemble due to very well fitting parts and good kit design. The level of detail is good throughout, with the ejector seat detail set from Edouard being the only really necessary aftermarket addition, although a more extensive masking set would also be useful. This kit could be considered something of a must for all Phantom fans, but it's a great option too for someone like me looking outside their usual area of interest and wanting to try something new. Obviously, one thing I haven't done with this build is to compare this Phantom with the other 48 scale Phantom kits that are on the market produced by other companies. I haven't had the chance to look at or build any of these, so a direct comparison would be unfair. However, one thing I can say is, having built this ZM kit here, if any of the others are as good or better, they must be pretty darn special. So, thanks for watching. I hope you found the presentation useful and informative. Any comments are always welcome. Hopefully it won't be too long before you can join me again for my next presentation, whatever that may be. Thanks again, take care, hope to see you soon.